I began to speak, but he cut me off with a sharp shake of his head. "We need to talk," he said in a low, controlled voice. He led me away from the group. I could feel everyone at the party looking at us, my cheeks burning with shame. But part of me was still in denial about the situation. Surely Ethan would forgive me, he always did. We stopped at the far end of the yard, hidden from view by Mrs. Parsons' hydrangea bushes. Ethan put the plate of burgers down on a nearby table and turned to face me. His usually warm brown eyes were cold and distant. "I'm done, Olivia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Done being your punching bag, done being the butt of your jokes, done being disrespected by you and everyone else, because you've made it clear that I'm not worthy of respect." His words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, shaking my head in denial. "It was just a joke," I said. "You know I didn't mean to humiliate you in front of our friends, or make you feel like less than a man, or take advantage of your love for me. I'm sorry, Ethan, please." "Olivia, you never considered how your actions affect others, including me," he said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I've put up with it for years, thinking that if I just loved you enough, if I just tried harder, you'd see me, really see me. But you don't." I reached out to touch his arm, but he flinched away, sending a spike of pain through my heart. "Ethan, I do see you. I love you. Please, let's just go home and talk about this." He shook his head, a bitter look on his face. "Olivia, I'm leaving. When you get home, your things will be packed and waiting for you on the porch. I don't want you in the house anymore." The finality in his voice sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't like our usual arguments where I could persuade him to change his mind, or where Ethan would eventually give in to keep the peace. This was different. This was the end. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice rising in panic. "Ethan, this is our home, our life. You can't just throw it all away over one stupid comment." "It's not just one comment, Olivia," he said quietly. "It's years of comments, years of disrespect, years of me giving everything I have to this relationship while you take and take and take." He looked at me, the pain in his eyes making my breath catch. "I love you, Olivia. God help me, I probably always will. But I can't do this anymore. I won't do this." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone among the hydrangeas. The sounds of the party were a stark contrast to the turmoil in my heart. I watched him make his way through the crowd, stopping briefly to say goodbye to our host before disappearing down the street towards our house. Our house. That thought jolted me into action. I hurried after him, ignoring the curious stares and whispered comments from our neighbors. By the time I reached our home, a quaint two-story colonial we bought just a year ago, I was out of breath. Ethan was already inside. I burst through the front door, calling his name. The sight that greeted me stopped me in my tracks. Ethan was in the living room, methodically packing my clothes into suitcases. I pleaded with him, moving to grab the shirt he was folding. "Please, Ethan, let's just talk," I begged. But he shot me a look and pulled the shirt away from me, his jaw tight. "Olivia, I've made my decision. But you can't just kick me out," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "This is my home too." "Actually, it's not," he replied calmly. "The house is in my name, remember? You didn't want to be tied down with a mortgage." That conversation came back to me. I'd pushed for Ethan to buy the house on his own, saying it would be better for our finances. But in reality, I thought it would be an easy way out if things ever got tough. I never imagined it would backfire on me like this. "Ethan, please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I'll do better. I'll change. Just give me another chance." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but then he shook his head, his resolve hardening. "Olivia, I've given you chances. Too many chances. It's too late now." He finished packing my clothes and moved on to my personal items. I watched helplessly as he efficiently packed away my life, occasionally asking me where I wanted certain things. The surreal nature of the situation made me feel like I was watching a movie of someone else's life falling apart. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across our once happy home, Ethan carried the last of my suitcases to the front porch. I stood in the doorway, feeling lost and small. "Where am I supposed to go?" I whispered. Ethan ran a hand over his face. For the first time, I noticed how tired he looked. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper than I remembered. "Call your parents or one of your friends." "I don't know, but you can't stay here." "What about us?" I asked, clinging to the last shred of hope. "Is this really it?" He looked at me with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Yeah, Olivia, this is really it. I'll have my lawyer draw up the divorce papers next week." He led me gently but firmly onto the porch and closed the door behind me. I heard the lock click into place with a chilling finality. I sank down onto the porch steps, surrounded by my hastily packed life, and let the tears flow freely, overwhelmed by the weight of my mistakes. The consequences of years of thoughtlessness and disrespect finally hit me. Update: I was joking and mocking my husband in front of my friends, as usually do to belittle him in their presence. Suddenly, my husband approached and calmly said, "It's all over between us." In that moment, I felt like my life was falling apart, and my heart shattered as I watched him walk away, leaving everything behind. Part 2. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and called my dad. "Dad," I said when he answered, "I've made a terrible mistake. I need you to come get me." The next few days passed in a blur. My parents greeted me with open arms, but I could see the disappointment in their eyes. They had always adored Ethan, viewing him as the son they never had. As I recounted the events that led to our separation, I could see them struggling to understand how I could have treated someone they considered family so poorly. I spent most of my time in my childhood bedroom, alternating between crying into my pillow and staring blankly at the walls. The cheerful yellow paint and faded posters from my teenage years seemed to mock me. I was flooded with messages from friends who had heard about what happened at the barbecue. Most were concerned and curious, eager for the juicy details of my marital breakdown. A few, like my supposed best friend Alexis, were more sympathetic, offering words of support and promises to be there for me. But as the days wore on and the reality of my situation sank in, I began to see these friendships for what they truly were: shallow connections built on gossip and mutual self-interest. I was pretty much on my own. Even in my family, none of them really cared about me or my pain. They were just happy to have some drama to discuss over their morning coffee. I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones one day when I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. "I just don't understand how she could have been so thoughtless," my mother said, her voice sad. "We raised her better than that," my father sighed. "I know, dear," he said softly, "but Olivia's always. Well, you know how she is. Always wanting to be the center of attention, never really thinking about how her actions affect others." "But Ethan," my mother replied, her voice thick with tears. "He was so good to her, so patient. He loved her more than anything, but she threw it all away." I retreated back to my room, their words ringing in my ears. For the first time, I started to see myself through other people's eyes, and the image wasn't flattering. That night, I couldn't sleep. I decided to do something I should have done days ago. I opened my laptop and started a new document. At the top, I typed, "Ways I hurt Ethan." As I began to write, I thought about all the times I had taken Ethan for granted, all the times I had belittled him or ignored his feelings, or put my own desires above his needs. The document grew longer and longer. By the time the first rays of dawn began to peek through my curtains, I had filled page after page with my transgressions. Reading through the list was like a punch to the gut. How had I become this person? How had I allowed myself to treat someone I claimed to love with such disregard? I was shaking as I reached for my phone. It was early, but I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to apologize to Ethan, to ask for forgiveness if that was even possible. But when I pulled up his contact, my thumb hovering over the call button, I hesitated. What right did I have to disturb his peace, to force him to confront the pain I had caused him? What would I even say? In that moment, I realized that I wanted to ease my own guilt, to make myself feel better. But what about what Ethan needed? I put my phone down. For once in my life, I decided to put someone else's needs before my own. If Ethan wanted space, I would give him space. If he wanted to move on without me, as much as it hurt, I would respect his decision. Instead, I opened my laptop again and started a new document. This time, I titled it, "How to Become a Better Person." It was time for me to do the hard work of self-reflection and personal growth. Not for Ethan, but for myself. I wanted to become a better person because I never wanted to be the kind of person who could hurt someone they loved ever again. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Life went on, as it tends to do, even when you feel like your world has stopped turning. I stayed at my parents' house, slowly putting the pieces of my life back together. The divorce proceedings were quick and straightforward. Ethan was a gentleman and didn't fight me on anything. He even agreed to a small settlement, despite contributing little financially to our marriage. He was always kind, even in the face of our separation. I got a job at a local marketing firm in an entry-level position. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly data entry and coffee runs, but it was a start. It was the first time in my adult life that I was supporting myself, learning the value of hard work and the satisfaction of earning my own money. My social life, which had once been the center of my world, dwindled to almost nothing. Most of my so-called friends had drifted away once they realized I was no longer a source of gossip or entertainment. Alexis stuck around for a while, but even she eventually stopped calling when it became clear that I was no longer interested in our old lifestyle of parties and mindless chatter. The silence and solitude were a stark contrast to my previous life. I began the hard work of self-improvement. I read self-help books, started journaling, and even began seeing a therapist to work through my issues. Dr. Larson, my therapist, was a kind but no-nonsense woman in her 50s. In our sessions, she helped me unpack years of selfish behavior and skewed perceptions. "Olivia," she said during one particularly difficult session, "have you ever considered why you felt the need to belittle Ethan in front of your friends?" I shrugged, picking at a loose thread on the arm of the chair. I guess I thought it made me look good, like I had this great guy who would do anything for me. I was just amazed that he put up with everything. Dr. Larson nodded thoughtfully. "And how do you think that made Ethan feel?" The question hit me like a ton of bricks. For the first time in my life, I really thought about what it would be like to be in Ethan's position. I imagine how it must feel to be the subject of constant jokes, to have your love and devotion mocked and taken for granted. "It's horrible," I said quietly, tears in my eyes. "It must have made him feel so small and worthless." "Exactly," Dr. Larson said gently. "Olivia, true love isn't about control. It's about showing mutual respect, support, and kindness. It's about lifting each other up, not tearing each other down." Her words stayed with me long after the session ended. I began to see all my past relationships, not just with Ethan, but with friends and family as well, in a new light. I realized how often I had prioritized my own needs and desires over everyone else's. I had used people for my own gain without considering their feelings. It was a painful realization, but a necessary one. I knew that if I ever wanted to have healthy relationships in the future, I needed to make some serious changes. One day, about 6 months after the fateful barbecue, I ran into Mrs. Parson at the local grocery store. I had been avoiding her and most of our old neighbors, too ashamed to face them after the way things had ended with Ethan. But there was no escaping the kind lady. She spotted me in the produce aisle and called out, "Olivia, dear. How are you?" I forced a smile, bracing myself for the awkward conversation ahead. "Hello, Mrs. Parson. I'm doing okay. How are you?" I was surprised to see that Mrs. Parson's face softened with genuine concern. She reached out and touched my arm, saying, "I've been worried about you, honey." "We all have." Her kindness was so unexpected that it brought tears to my eyes. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, hastily wiping at my cheeks. I've made such a mess of everything." Mrs. Parson replied, glancing around the store before guiding me towards a quiet corner. "Listen, Olivia," she said in a low, kind voice. "We all make mistakes. Lord knows I've made my fair share. The important thing is that we learn from them." I nodded, unable to speak. "Have you talked to Ethan recently?" she asked carefully. I shook my head. "No. I've been giving him space. I don't think he wants to hear from me." Mrs. Parson said, "You might be surprised, dear. Ethan's been asking about you." I was taken aback, hope flowering in my chest. "He has?" Mrs. Parson nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Ethan always thinks of others, even when they don't deserve it." "I don't deserve his concern," I said softly. Mrs. Parson clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "We all deserve compassion, Olivia, even when we've made mistakes." She reached into her purse, pulled out a small notebook and pen, and quickly scribbled something. She tore off the page and handed it to me. "This is Ethan's new number," she said. "He changed it a while back. I think he'd appreciate hearing from you." I stared at the number, my heart racing. "I don't know if I can," I whispered. Mrs. Parson squeezed my arm gently. "You don't have to decide right now. Just think about it." I nodded, carefully folding the paper and tucking it into my pocket. As Mrs. Parson said goodbye and continued with her shopping, I stood there, feeling as if the world had shifted on its axis. That night, I sat on my bed, staring at the piece of paper with Ethan's number. My phone lay beside me, silent and accusing. I picked it up, my fingers hovering over the keypad. What would I even say? How do you even start to apologize for years of thoughtlessness and disrespect? How do you ask for forgiveness from someone you've hurt so deeply? In the end, I decided on a text. It felt cowardly.